So you want to own a McDonald's. Somewhere in Chicago right now, a woman with $2 million in the bank is standing over a fryer at 6 in the morning in the same polyester uniform as the 17-year-old next to her. And she is not there by accident. She's there because McDonald's told her that's the only door in. Not a signature on a contract, a mop, a grill, a full year sometimes of unpaid work before they'll even discuss letting her spend her own money. That should sound backwards. A company handing you the hardest, lowest paid job in the building right when you're finally rich enough to skip it. But stick with this one, because the reason McDonald's does that is the same reason this business has quietly made more ordinary people wealthy than almost any other franchise on earth, and also the same reason it has broken people who did everything right. By the end of this, you'll understand both halves of that and which one is actually more likely to be yours. Here's the part almost nobody expects going in. You, a person who can pay for the entire restaurant in cash, are going to spend the next several months to a full year flipping patties for free while McDonald's decides if you're allowed to give them your money. That's not a hazing ritual. That's the business model working exactly as designed. And it exists because the company learned, the expensive way, that the people who make it in this system aren't the ones with the biggest bank account. They're the ones who can survive standing at that fryer without quitting on day 40. Let's talk about what you're actually buying, because it isn't what you think. In the United States, the traditional franchise, the one everybody pictures, requires a total investment of somewhere between $1.47 million and $2.73 million. That range comes straight out of the current franchise disclosure document, the legal filing every franchisor has to hand you before you sign anything. Inside that number, the franchise fee itself, the actual right to use the name McDonald's, the golden arches, the whole brand, is $45,000. That's it. $45,000 is the smallest line item in the entire investment, roughly 2 to 3% of what you're about to spend. Everything else, the other 97%, is the cost of building the box the name gets bolted onto. Equipment alone, the fryers, the grills, the shake machines, the digital menu boards, runs from around $325,000 on the cheap end to over $1.5 million if you're building a full new location with double drive-thrus and a modern kitchen line. Add the first 3 months of rent, which can run past $300,000 by itself before you've sold a single fry, plus opening inventory, plus staff training, plus a working capital cushion, and you land inside that $1.47 to $2.73 million band. And here's the part that filters out 90% of the people who call themselves interested. At least $500,000 of that has to be your own liquid cash, not financed, not borrowed against your house, sitting in an account provably yours before McDonald's will even open a file on you. They also want to see a net worth north of $1 million. This isn't a loan application. It's a background check on whether you can survive the business without the business having to save you first. So say you clear that bar. You've got the $500,000 in liquid cash, the $1 million in net worth, and now you're the woman from the opening. On the training path McDonald's requires every incoming owner to walk, working inside an existing restaurant full-time for around 6 months if you can manage 35 hours a week, or stretched out closer to a year if you're doing it part-time. Unpaid. You're taking orders, you're on the grill, you're cleaning the bathrooms, because at some point, somebody has to, and today that somebody is you, and the 17-year-old next to you has technically outranked you in tenure since about lunchtime. Layered on top of that hands-on stretch is Hamburger University, McDonald's internal training campus outside Chicago, where they run you through food cost management, labor scheduling, and how to keep 60 employees who would mostly rather be anywhere else actually showing up on time. There's a real curriculum, real exams, and yes, you can fail them. All in, the runway from first application to keys in your hand is commonly 12 to 18 months, and completing training doesn't guarantee you a restaurant. For every available location, there are usually several qualified candidates, and one person, a field vice president who has never met you for coffee, decides who gets it based on your performance during that unpaid year, your references, and frankly, whether they simply like you. It's a brutal filter. It's also, if you're being honest about human nature, A pretty good one. The people who make it through tend to be the people who were never going to fold the first time a walk-in cooler broke at 5 a.m. Which brings us to the man who proves this whole grinding, humiliating process is actually worth it if you stick with it. In 1983, a 25-year-old named Vijay Selhi arrived in the United States from a small village in India with no money, no connections, and English that was still a work in progress. He took a job as a cashier at a McDonald's in Somerville, Massachusetts for $3 an hour. Cashier to shift leader to manager to territorial supervisor, one promotion at a time for 32 years. In 2015, at around 60 years old, he finally had the track record and capital to buy his first 2 restaurants, and one of them was the exact Somerville location where he'd started at the register. Today, he and his sons run 18 McDonald's locations across Greater Boston. Keep him in your head, because everything expensive and grinding you're about to hear is the same system that turned a $3 an hour cashier into a multi-unit owner. The system isn't gentle, it isn't always fair, but it is provably climbable. Now for the part that actually explains the whole business, the part almost no one thinks about when they picture owning a McDonald's. Everything you just heard, the $1.47 to $2.73 million range, the fact that the brand name itself is only $45,000 of it, the endless fees stacked on top of each other, none of it makes sense until you understand a decision one man made almost 70 years ago, a decision that had nothing to do with hamburgers at all. It starts with a conversation that happened in 1956. Ray Kroc, the man who turned McDonald's into a national chain, had a problem. His restaurants were running on razor-thin margins, roughly 1.5 cents of profit on every 15-cent burger, and there wasn't enough cash flowing back to fund new locations. He brought in a finance executive named Harry Sonneborn, and Sonneborn told him something that restructured the entire company from that point forward. You are not in the hamburger business. You are in the real estate business. The idea was simple and, frankly, a little ruthless. McDonald's corporate would lease or buy the land and the building. Then it would sublease that same property to the franchisee at a markup of 20 to 40% over what McDonald's itself was paying, or 5% of the restaurant's gross sales, whichever number was bigger for McDonald's. That structure, built in 1956, is still functionally the backbone of the company today. McDonald's currently owns or holds long-term control of the land under a majority of its restaurants worldwide. And that real estate portfolio, land and buildings combined, is worth tens of billions of dollars, representing the overwhelming majority of everything the corporation owns. So here's the reveal, and it's worth sitting with. You are not becoming a restaurant owner. You are becoming a very well-supervised tenant who happens to sell burgers, paying rent to a landlord who also happens to be your supplier, your trainer, your inspector, and your boss, all wearing the same corporate jacket. Let's put actual numbers on that landlord relationship, because this is where the ongoing math either works for you or quietly works against you every single month for the next 20 years, the standard length of a McDonald's franchise agreement. You'll pay rent, and this isn't a fixed number like a normal commercial lease. It's a percentage of your gross sales, typically running 8 to 15%, and in some high-traffic locations, climbing as high as the low 30s. On top of rent, you owe a royalty fee for the right to keep using the brand and the operating system, which sat at 4% of gross sales for years, and starting with new franchise agreements from 2024 onward, moved up to 5%, the first increase of its kind in decades. Then there's a marketing contribution, generally around 4% of gross sales, funding the national advertising you see during football games. Add those together, and a franchisee is routinely handing over somewhere between 16 and 23% of every single dollar that crosses the counter before they've paid a single employee, bought a single ounce of beef, or covered 1 minute of electricity. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. Your rent goes up automatically when your restaurant does well, because it's tied to your sales. The better you perform, the more your landlord charges you for the privilege of performing well. Imagine your actual apartment landlord raising your rent because you got a promotion at work. That's the deal you're signing. Quick gut check before we go further, because you've done this without realizing it. You've stood in that exact restaurant at 10:30 at night ordering a large fries you absolutely did not need, and it never once occurred to you that a slice of that $4 was quietly being routed to a real estate holding structure built the year your grandparents were dating. You weren't buying a snack. You were making a rent payment on someone else's building. Every single person reading this has personally funded that landlord relationship without ever meeting the landlord. So what's actually left over for the person running the place? The average domestic McDonald's location generates right around $4 million a year in gross sales, among the highest average revenue of any burger chain in the country. But revenue is not the number that pays your mortgage. Out of that $4 million, roughly 20%, around $800,000, goes straight back to McDonald's in rent, royalty, and marketing before you touch it. Food costs, labor for the 60-odd employees running your kitchen and counter, utilities, insurance, and the mandatory technology fee for the point-of-sale system and mobile app, which runs around $5,000 a year and keeps climbing, eat through most of what's left. On a well-run location, the owner typically walks away with somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $550,000 a year in personal income, depending heavily on the specific location, the local rent percentage, and how tightly the operator runs labor. That's a genuinely strong income. It's also, against an investment of somewhere around $1.8 to $2 million, a payback period that commonly stretches 5 to 7 years, meaning half a decade or more of showing up every single day before you've even earned back your own initial cash, let alone started actually building wealth from the thing you bought. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable, because the same rigid, all-powerful structure that makes McDonald's reliable can also make it merciless. And nobody demonstrates that better than a man named Herbert Washington. A former Major League Baseball player, Washington became a McDonald's franchisee in 1980 and, at his peak, around 2017, owned roughly 27 restaurants, at one point the largest black-owned McDonald's operation in the country. In 2021, he filed a federal lawsuit alleging that McDonald's had systematically steered black franchisees like himself into lower-income, lower-volume neighborhoods, then penalized them for the lower sales those locations produced, effectively building in the exact underperformance the corporation would later use as a reason to push them out. By the time he filed suit, his restaurant count had already fallen from 27 to 14. McDonald's denied violating any law. The case settled in December 2021, with McDonald's agreeing to buy 13 of Washington's remaining restaurants for $33.5 million, in exchange for Washington exiting the system entirely and dropping the litigation. $33.5 million sounds enormous, until you remember it bought him out of the business, not into a bigger one. It's the corporate equivalent of getting handed a very large check on your way out the door you never asked to walk through. His quote afterward has stuck with people inside the franchise world for years. Inside McDonald's, there are two systems. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Around the same period, McDonald's settled a similar discrimination claim from franchisee brothers James and Darrell Bird for $6.5 million, covering 4 restaurants, and faced a broader lawsuit from dozens of former black franchisees, alleging the exact same pattern of being steered into locations designed to struggle. This is the part of the fantasy nobody puts in the brochure. Even inside a system built on rules, contracts, and 20-year agreements, who gets the good real estate and who gets pushed out when things go sideways can still come down to something far less mechanical than the spreadsheet suggests. And the tension hasn't cooled off. It's happening right now. In January 2026, an independent group representing thousands of McDonald's operators, the National Owners Association, formally adopted what they're calling a Franchisee Bill of Rights. 15 standards they say McDonald's corporate has been quietly eroding for years. The centerpiece is the right to set your own menu prices without fear of retaliation. That might sound like a small technical dispute, but think about what it actually means. Franchisees, independent business owners who signed a 20-year lease and put up their own capital are having to formally petition their own franchisor for permission to decide what to charge for a Big Mac in their own building. McDonald's maintains that operators have always controlled their own pricing. Franchisees, in an industry survey conducted around the same time, rated the health of their relationship with corporate at an average of 1.37 out of 5, the lowest score recorded in over 20 years of that same survey being run. For context, that's the kind of score you'd expect from a landlord who shows up unannounced and grades your apartment on how well you're advertising his building. You can own the building, staff the building, and sweat inside the building every single day, and still be negotiating with a landlord over whether you're allowed to set your own prices. By now, you might be doing the math on whether any of this actually beats the alternative. And here's the number that ends most of these conversations quietly. Over the past 20 years, McDonald's Corporation stock has grown by roughly 700%. $2 million invested in McDonald's shares 2 decades ago, with dividends reinvested, would be worth in the neighborhood of $16 million today. No unpaid year scrubbing toilets, no hamburger university exam, no 20-year lease with an automatic rent increase every time you succeed. No field vice president deciding your fate based on a gut feeling. Just a brokerage account and the patience to leave it alone. The corporation figured out decades ago, through a conversation between 2 men in 1956, that owning the real estate underneath the burgers was worth infinitely more than flipping the burgers themselves. The franchisees are the ones standing at the grill proving that thesis correct. One 20-year lease at a time. So if you still want to do this, and plenty of smart, hardworking people genuinely should, walk in with your eyes open about what you're actually signing up for. You're not buying a restaurant, you're leasing the right to operate one. From a landlord who sets your training, your suppliers, your technology, and increasingly, according to the very people running these restaurants right now, even your own prices. That's the real deal on the table, and it's a demanding one. But remember where we started. A woman standing over a fryer at 6 in the morning with $2 million in the bank isn't proof that the system is designed to humble you. She's proof of exactly what Vijay Selhi already showed us, that this business, unlike most of the ones on this channel, is genuinely climbable from the bottom. One shift, one promotion, one unglamorous year at a time, if you're willing to actually put in the work the system demands, instead of just the capital it requires. Herbert Washington's story is the reason you protect yourself with contracts, records, and a lawyer who reads every page. Vijay Selhi's story is the reason people still line up for this in the first place. Both are true. Which one becomes your story has a lot more to do with what you do after they hand you the mop than most people want to admit.